Okay, so here is the plan for today, guys. I am going to finish this section on the role of the Latin American state. It's probably going to take me, I don't know, half an hour, maybe less. And then I want to switch gears a little bit to explain and I'll give you a few hints related to the exam that is coming up in roughly 2 weeks. As you obviously have noticed, there is no homework, not much work to do relative to other classes, I am sure. But again, I really expect you to be reading, catching up with the videos, and doing what you're supposed to do, which is not much, quite frankly, okay? But anyway, I want to go back to the instructions for the exam, give you a few hints, give you some ideas about how to get ready for the test and things like that, all right? So before I do that, any questions, any comments? I'm sure you have been in other classes, but I don't always see you. So anyway, it's good seeing you. Okay, so let me start sharing my screen. There we go. So for the past 2 classes, we have been discussing the role of the Latin American state, which basically boils down to figuring out what the government should be doing in terms of promoting economic development in Latin America. And in the context of the debt crisis, this gained particular attention because obviously understanding the role of the government became very, very important. So basically, we went over these theoretical ideas, you know, basically 3 camps: the free market sponsors, you know, neoliberals thinking. Then we had the new institutional thinking, and then the neo-structural thinking. But, you know, I want to go back here. What I really want to do right now is just to make sure that nobody has questions about, you know, the idea of why Latin American countries are having such a big challenge when it comes to raising tax revenue. So we want the government to be, you know, efficient, and we don't want the government to misspend like any other government in any other region of the world. But before they can spend the money, they need to generate the money. And in Latin America, this is a problem because remember, many people operate in the underground economy, the informal sector, and they are able to escape the income tax, which is one of the main sources of tax revenue in rich economies like the US. You know, this is why, you know, every April 15, you have to file this 1040 with the IRS. Well, in Mexico, in many Latin American countries, although they do have the equivalent institutions to the IRS, if you think that the system here is very inefficient, you have not seen anything inefficient yet. So the point is that in Latin America, because of this issue, we observe what we call a very regressive tax system that relies mostly on sales tax. But when you think about this, if you're making $1 million or you're making $20,000 a year, you pay the same, say, 10% sales tax. And many people think, what's wrong with that? You know, it's 10%, everybody pays the same percentage. But when you think about how much the sales tax represents of your income, that's when you think, wait a second. Lower income people are actually paying more than rich people. And, you know, this creates all sorts of distortions, not just income and wealth inequality over time, but also this reluctance on certain, you know, segments of the population to comply with the tax and figuring out ways to evade the tax, which once again makes the informal sector very, very attractive. Again, I don't want to repeat everything I said, but I think I said before, but I think this is important to emphasize. Tax revenue collection in Latin America is a huge, huge challenge. So if we want an efficient government that is going to be, building the roads, the hospitals, the schools, keeping the military, the police forces, all of this in good shape, well, they need to figure out how to tax revenue, how to generate tax revenue first. And well, they are not there yet. The second part of this section was about corruption. Unfortunately, Latin America, similar to many other developing countries in the world, suffers from high levels of corruption at all level, at all levels, local, state, federal government. And you can check this website, Transparency International, which over time has been tracking self-reported perception of corruption. You can check the methodology there. The point is that, think about this. Corruption, in a very cynical way, can be characterized as the wheels, as the oil of the system to make sure that the wheels work, right? If you don't pay the bribe, things don't happen. If you pay the bribe, things move along. But here's the other problem. I'm not talking about the ethics or the morale behind the problem, which is a whole different issue that we can tackle in a philosophy or a sociology class. I'm talking about the pure economic phenomena here. The impact of corruption falls more heavily on low-income people for the same reason, because it works like similar to a regressive tax. If you are making $1 million and you have to pay $10,000 in a bribe, it's not the same that paying $10,000 in a bribe when you're making $50,000. Does that make sense? So the tax system is regressive. Corruption, as attractive for some people might be in terms of expedite the bureaucracies of these large and inefficient economies, also is a very regressive situation. Let me check the chat. I think I have somebody in the chat. Oh, my phone is not playing your audio. Well, you can fix that. Okay. So anyway, and then we also talk about privatization. This is the time, the 1980s and the early 90s in Latin America, where you saw the, creation of these mega wealthy families in Latin America. We had many really rich families before the privatization or privatization. But after that, when all these state-owned enterprises were sold to private hands, I think I gave the example in the previous class of Carlos Slim, that they got very lucrative industries at a very, very discounted price. Not the ongoing market value. No. A very reduced, attractive, super juicy price. But not only that, in many cases, they were able to negotiate because, of course, they were, teaming up with the sellers. They also got protection. So the idea originally was to move all these important industries from government hands to private hands, and then through competition, international and domestic competition, make sure that these industries finally grew, that finally developed, that they finally achieve economies of scale and they became competitive. Well, but that didn't happen in many cases. In many countries like Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, the buyers of these industries were able to also get, as part of the package, protection from the federal government. Protection from whom? Well, from international competition. So similar to the ISI strategy, remember that, this protective bubble, the federal governments of many of these countries gave significant amount of protection, for example, to Carlos Slim when he bought Telmex, the the phone industry in Mexico for 10 years. So for 10 years, you couldn't see AT&T or Verizon or any other, these major international companies going to Mexico because they were not allowed to. And the same with beer, the same with soda, and the same with many other industries. They got a very, very juicy deal. And I have not checked the most recent statistics, but if you check the what's the name of this magazine, Fortune magazine, more likely you are going to discover that Carlos Slim is still among probably the 10 wealthiest men on earth. And this is a Mexican guy, which, again, we're talking about a developing country. And then if you go down the list, you're going to find other people in, you're going to hit places like Brazil, Chile, even Venezuela, right? Which, well, we can talk about Venezuela in a few minutes. But anyway, that's where I stop. And then I said, for today, I am going to talk about this. So remember, Latin America was in a really weak financial position because they had a huge amount of debt. The international financial community was demanding their payments. Latin American countries couldn't pay. And because there is no possibility of collateral, I mean, like I explained before, if you are borrowing from the bank and you don't pay, they take over. They repossess your house. They repossess your car. But in this case, you cannot repossess a country, right? So anyway, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and eventually the World Bank became what in financial lingo is known as the lenders of last resort. When nobody, absolutely nobody wants to give you any more money, not commercial banks, no governments, no treasuries, nobody, you can always knock the door of the IMF and say, hey guys, I'm in troubles. I am in financial troubles, I need help. And that's exactly what happened in Latin America. They were in, in this very weak financial position. And the IMF joins this, historical event by the implementation of what I have already defined as conditionality. So since there is no possibility of presenting collateral, conditionality is a substitute, which basically is the assurance that policy is going to change in certain ways, according to the IMF economists and officers, so that the economy is going to be in a better position to generate the capacity to pay the money back. So the IMF is going to say, okay, guys, I'm gonna keep financing you, but you need to demonstrate that you are actually transforming the way you administer your economies. And this is the way typically this works. So there is an agreement, and the agreement is called a letter of intent. Very diplomatic language, very elegant. So basically, the letter of intent is, a commitment, official federal government commitment before the IMF to fulfill certain criteria, in condition to the release of the funds. So the IMF says, okay, we are going to offer you, for example, a $10 billion package, a rescue stabilization package. But they are not going to release the full amount at once. No. I mean, you don't need $10 billion at once. You only need to signal investors and the international financial community that you have somebody ready to bail you out. In this case, the IMF, right? That's all you need. It's somebody it's out there big enough that can vouch for what you're doing. That's enough. But of course, you need to receive a constant flow of dollars or euros, foreign exchange. So the IMF is going to send officers, and this happened all the time in the 1980s and the 1990s, officers to all these different Latin American countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, Mexico, Costa Rica. They will open up offices, physical offices, where they will actually locate operate. And of course, their job was to, well, tell domestic policymakers what to do and monitor that they were doing what they were supposed to. Because if they didn't, they immediately will, blow the whistle and send word to the IMF that these guys were, breaking with the letter of intent, and therefore the flow of this money would dry. Right now, you may be thinking, what's the big deal, Professor? Well, remember that bucket that we define as the balance of payments. If you don't have enough reserves, and by reserves, remember, we mean the 5 hard currencies, or gold and silver, euros, dollars, Japanese yens, and so forth, how are you going to buy or to pay for imports? If countries are not producing enough food, they have to buy food from other countries, but they have no money. Medicine, equipment, right? So this inflow, these loans by the IMF are very, very important, not only to control a short-term temporary crisis, but also to finance the future growth by investing in, the purchasing of capital goods, to build a dam, a highway, a hospital, an airport. All of these things require massive injections of capital, and they were only given to you or to them by the IMF. Sorry. So the typical program, in the next chapter, we are going to actually go in very high detail about this, but the typical program was evaluation, control of inflation, control of your fiscal deficit, elimination of tariffs and quotas, liberalization of markets, financial, labor markets, and also, the elimination of all sorts of subsidies and price controls. So the idea, once again, in a way, if you think about this, the neoliberal agenda was behind all this, because the whole intent was to let the markets be as free as possible, to become as efficient as possible, and finally get Latin America out of the hole they put themselves in with the ISI strategy. That was the whole idea, right? All right, let me make a pause here so to gather your thoughts or comments if you have any. No one? All right. So, oh, I saw a hand up. Cody, you wanna say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about the reaction from these industries. Is this after? So this is, you said this was during ISI, correct?
No, after.
Or just like it's kind of right after ISI, like they shift from ISI to this liberalization, correct?
Well, remember, here is the sequence of historical events. You have ISI for 30, 40 years. In 1982, it becomes clear that it's not sustainable. And then Mexico declares a moratorium, basically saying, I cannot pay you back. This produces this domino effect that all countries in Latin America say, I cannot pay my debt. Now, this weak financial position is used by these multilateral agencies as an, the right historical moment to get into Latin America and get these guys under control, because they were, in the minds of these people, they were veering way too much to the left, right? Dependency theory, this socialist, heavy, omnipresent government, heavy taxation, regulation that clearly was not working. So that's a long answer. The short answer is ISI, debt crisis, IMF, World Bank conditionality. Does that make sense, Cody?
Yeah. What was the reaction from the domestic business owners and the domestic sort of economic and political elites when they were sort of being dictated to by the IMF?
Well, in most cases, people in Latin America didn't have much to say, because remember, for 40, 50 years, they had been under the protective bubble of the ISI. So many of them were ready to, to get to the big leagues. They said, okay, I'm ready to finally compete for real without having this domestic market captive. We want to export. We want to, check what's going on with technology, here and there. But the problem was that most of the people thinking like I am describing were the minority. Once again, people in Latin America that speak English, that has a passport, that understand, financial markets, that understands the importance of networking, communication channels, marketing channels, transportation channels, all of these things that are key to succeed in this globalized world are a tiny fraction, right? Everybody else is like, okay, I'm just really working and doing what I'm doing to get by, to survive. So, the money shakers, the decision makers are a very small, well-defined group of individuals in many, if not all Latin American economies, Cody. So the reaction for these guys was, in general of welcoming, because they said, let's do it. Let's go after this. I'm ready, especially if you are giving me protection, especially if you are giving me access to these industries at a very super low price. I'll buy you the communication industry, I'll buy the beer industry, I'll buy all of these industries at a discount, give me protection, and I'll happily, enter into this globalized world. Yeah. Not surprisingly, Cody, this is yet another element that helps explain the significantly high level of income and wealth inequality in Latin America. So, since the colonial times, the seeds of this inequality were in the high concentration of land ownership that didn't change much even after independence. Well, all these huge landowners are pretty much the ancestors of the current rich families in Latin America. Yeah, so it is very rare to see an indigenous last name in either Peru or Ecuador or Mexico that is from a rich family. Typically, most of the people in Latin America that enjoy high fortunes and is wealthy, they have Spanish last names. Yeah, not all of them. My last name is not indigenous. Avalos is from Spain, and I'm not rich, right? So I'm not trying to say that every Latin American person of Spanish descent is rich. In fact, after 300-400 centuries of mixing, it's very hard to see, who is who, your percentage in the blood or whatever. But what it is very clear is that the indigenous communities are still significantly marginalized. In some cases, I can take you to places in Mexico where some communities, they don't speak Spanish, right? Let me tell you this quick story. Actually, this is actually kind of cool. I mean, a few years ago, and this was an eye-opening for me, guys. A few years ago, I was walking on campus when we used to walk on campus. And there was this student, a female student, was pretty nice, smiling. And we say hi and we start walking on the same path. And we weren't, walking for long. But anyway, so we start talking. Obviously, she clearly exhibits some indigenous features that I recognize as, possibly Mexican, possibly from Oaxaca and all that. So, of course, I was trying to be respectful but she started volunteering information until I said, hey, so are you bilingual? And she said, of course, professor, of course I'm bilingual. Oh, and then I, when I saw the opening, guess what? I switched and I started speaking Spanish. And then she stopped me. No, but professor, but no, hold on. I speak English and Zapoteca, which is the indigenous language in Oaxaca, in Mexico. It's like, what do you mean? Well, I was brought to the US when I was a baby. And at home, we only spoke Zapoteca, no Spanish. So I went to high school and all the educational system in the US, and I learned English. So I'm bilingual, but I have no idea what you're saying. So think about it. So there are places in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Peru, where the places of the really high civilizations, the Incas, the Aztecs, and others, where they still have very limited contact with civilization, extremely limited. And well, let me tell you another story. So in 1999, I was living in Venezuela. I was working for the Andean Corporation of Development in Caracas, Venezuela. I was there for 3-4 months. It was a summer, awesome summer for me. But anyway, this bank of development, in this bank, I had, my co-workers were many of them were economists from Harvard and MIT, pretty smart people, whatever, right? And when it became time to go on a vacation, they went on a helicopter ride, pretty rich guys, on a helicopter ride to the Angel Falls, which is, I think, the second largest waterfall in the world. And I said, no, I am not going with you guys, because at the time, my brother was living in Caracas, in Venezuela, working with the indigenous communities in the Amazon River. So I switched the helicopter ride in the, Angel Falls and I went to the jungle, right? So it was an awesome experience, because they allowed me to enter into this ceremony where they were initiating some young people. And, similar to what you see in the movies. I mean, I felt like I was inside a movie. And for my brother, my brother at the time was barefoot and no flashlight. When I pull up my flashlight, he just like, what are you talking about? That's why we have the moon, things like that. So they prepare this beverage, spitting to ferment. And everybody was passing around the beverage. So you have to have a sip, and it's like, okay, I remember when I came back to Caracas and I told my story, they thought I was totally crazy. But anyway, the point is that I'm not making this up, guys. It's true. Many, I'm talking about millions of people. If you count the entire, 20 plus countries in Latin America, there are many million people that have never seen what you and I take for granted, like flipping the switch or open the faucet to get water. They don't know what that means. Anyway, let's see. I went sideways so bad here. Let me go back. All right. So let me say this. So when the World Bank and the IMF enter into this picture, of course, Latin America has no choice but to comply. And that was the actual state of events during the 90s and so forth. But here is something else that happened that very few people pay attention, at least at the time. So here is the story, guys. When you want to grow, think about this as a personal at the personal level. So when you want to grow your business, you have basically two options. You either borrow money that you have to pay back, or you look for partnerships, right? A friend or a family member with some capital that is going to inject the money into your company, and then you become partners, right? So what's the difference? Well, there is a very, very important difference, guys. So think about this. If you borrow the money, you have to pay it back, but you keep 100% control over the company. Nobody tells you what to do. You are the single owner. Now, if you look for partnerships, and then let's say this guy brings whatever amount of money or a group of friends, and then you split 50-50 or whatever percentage, guess what? You start losing control over the future of the company. You get the basic idea? So in Latin America, when the international financial community said, you guys screw this up, you know, the IMF is going to rescue you and all that. So all this financing that used to be in the form of loans, leaving Latin America free to decide what to do, with and through the IMF and World Bank intervention, it flipped from commercial loans to foreign direct investment. So the international community basically said, okay, now that you seem to be getting your act together, thanks to the conditionality approach that the IMF and the World Bank are imposing on you, we are going to be willing to be back to your industries in Latin America, but now no loans, guys. No, you don't know what you're doing. We want some percentage, some stake in the company, right? So FDI, foreign direct investment, became the new form in this surge, in this dramatic increase in the capital flows to Latin America. But it was very important because now Latin America had a lot less control. Chad, go ahead.
Did certain Latin American countries' constitutions prevent some of this? Like Mexican Revolution, that was a big part of it, was the American and European investment. Did constitutions or amendments have to be passed to allow foreign investment into certain markets or industries?
Yes, Chad, good point. Good point. Most Latin American countries, with a few exceptions, the one that comes to mind is Chile, but most Latin American countries limit FDI to 49% for obvious reasons, right? In Chile, they said, no, forget it. You know, if we don't give some control over at least certain industries to people that really know what they're doing when they are injecting this capital, they are not going to have enough skin in the game to actually what is going to be good for the company. You see, they took a very different approach. But in the vast majority of Latin American countries, foreign direct investment is limited to 49% ownership. And that's, in a way to prevent losing control. Yeah, good question. Yep. All right. So this is what I was trying to say here. Composition significantly changed from commercial lending to FDI. All right. Now, here is my attempt to plant a seed for what eventually is going to become a good discussion of the new left in Latin America. But anyway, during those days, like I said before, most people in industry were welcoming all these change in policies and all these IMF conditions, because they said, okay, let's bring it on. I'm ready. Let's do it. But think about this, the dramatic reduction in subsidies, the dramatic flexibilization in the labor market, the almost disappearance of unions, especially government unions. All of these things produce a significant amount of angst and anxiety and discontent among the population in Latin America. Not the rich families, not the ones that were, you know, saying, let's bring this on. I'm talking about the other 90+% of the population. You know, the populace, the large majority of the people on the countryside, the ones working on the informal economy, the you know, people that, you know, really were just making money to make ends meet, right? So it was during these years that many really smart, or what they seemed to be at the time, smart politicians began building political platforms on populist grounds. They start running. I'm talking about people like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. I'm talking about like Correa in Ecuador, and others, Nicaragua, Brazil with Lula da Silva. These guys saw this as a great opportunity to go back, well, to get access to power, because they saw that many people were having a rough time, right? And this is how you got places like Venezuela electing Hugo Chavez. I'm going to give you a list of names and dates later. The point I'm trying to make is that in this, just to close this section, at the time, and by the way, this is what, Chad, your hand is up, is the same from before?
No, pardon me, I didn't lower it.
Oh, okay, sorry, never mind. So this so-called new left, and this is, I think, hopefully going to finally make sense. The new left refers to a new generation of politicians that, in a somewhat nostalgic, strategic way, start thinking about the stability and the protection and the benefits in their minds of the ISI strategy, the original new left, the original people promoting protection, government interference, regulation, taxation. These guys were masters in this political discourse, and they won the presidency, you know, of many these countries. And again, I am going to discuss this in the next few days. But the point I'm trying to make in this closing section is that at the time, many people had actually some analysts, like this guy, Juan Carlos Moreno Brit from ECLAC. You can read this on your own. But the point is that some analysts, serious people, with good reputation analysts, had some hope that perhaps these guys, once they grabbed power, were finally going to get something that worked. Not the extreme ISI strategy, not the painful neoliberal pill that, you know, societies have to swallow right now. Something in between that made sense. Not running high rates of inflation, not overspending, getting corruption under control, investing in infrastructure, investing in health and education, all of these things, stabilizing the country, actually inviting investors, not rejecting investors, all of these things. And as we will discover later, well, things didn't go that well, especially for places like Venezuela right now, for places like perhaps Bolivia right now. Although there are a few places where these original new left are still in power, like the Chamorro family, I'm sorry, the, what's the name? Ortega family in Nicaragua. These guys are still in power. And this is actually very relevant, guys, because think about this. Mexico, so far, you know, even after Chavez, Mexico after Venezuela, Brazil, Ecuador, Nicaragua, all of these countries was one of the few Latin American countries where never had given a chance to a leftist politician to become president. But this, 2-3 years ago, it was the first time. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but the current president of Mexico, his name is Andrés Manuel López Obrador. This guy ran in a populist, with a populist leftist platform and won the presidency. Now think about this. This is south of the US. Mexico is a member of the, well, I forgot the new name of the new North America Free Trade Agreement. But the point is this is not over yet. This is still an ongoing debate, intellectual debate, policy debate that is not over, guys. The same way the debt crisis is not over, the same way the transformation of economics is not over, and many other things, are still happening, Anyway, let me stop here. Questions, comments? No worries, I am going to expand all these ideas in the next few days. I hope it's going to get more interesting, it's going to get more relevant, it's going to get more current for sure. And I'll tell you stories about, things that happened to me when, well, I haven't traveled to Latin America very recently, other than Mexico, but I used to be in places like Chile, Argentina, Nicaragua, and, I can tell you pretty interesting stuff, current, relevant stuff later. All right. Questions, comments? Checking my screens. All right. So yes, Dylan, go ahead.
So so when you left kind of started taking over after following the conditionality policies, started implementing the new left policies, did the IMF welcome support? Was there any consequences?
I guess we lost Dylan, but that's a good question. So if I understood Dylan correctly, he was asking about whether there were some consequences when the new leftist governments switch policies. Oh, you're still there, Dylan. Good. So the answer is yes, but get this. When Venezuela start moving away from the IMF and the World Bank recipe, they start partnering with other rich countries in the world, China, the Soviets, right? So on the one hand, you may see your source of revenue drying up because you are breaking up with every letter of intent and all of these conditions. The IMF is going to say, forget it, you're done. But for many people, for many of these countries, including Nicaragua, Ecuador, they start, getting closer to countries that are not very friendly to these policies and or the USA, us here. So the Soviets start, helping. China start helping too, and that provide a huge valve of relief, and that's how they were able to keep moving ahead. So yeah, I mean, there were consequences, but they were not severe in the sense that as soon as they said, okay, we are not going to give you $1 billion in the next 10 years, the Chinese said, well, we will, no worries. All you have to do is to keep selling some oil, Venezuela, or send access to your resources. No problem. We can, we are rich too. You don't have to go with these rich guys. They are imposing their recipes. I have no strings, or if I do, they look like yours. So let's partner up, and they did. So yeah, I mean, this geopolitical situation, historical situation in Latin America in the 1980s and the early 2000s was very, very unique, because that was the time when China was growing at, well, this is debatable, 8-9% per year. So they were in this takeoff stage, right? And they were like investing all over the place. In fact, I don't know what's the status right now, but the Chinese are were in conversations with people in Nicaragua to open up another canal, so that the US didn't have all the control over the Panama Canal, restricting the flow of Chinese goods and stuff. Plus, the size of the ships are much, much bigger. So for the Chinese, it's of huge interest to have their own passage. And they are in conversations with Nicaragua to build another canal, which, it's an interesting idea, right? Anyway, let me share this very quickly because I don't want to forget. Let's see, share, where is this? Yeah. All right. So again, I just want to remind everybody that the exam is coming up, not this Friday, but the one after. And on Canvas, in Canvas, you have access to these files called review files or review questions. Anyway, if you open the first one up, it's going to give you a sample of questions that are going to be very similar to the questions in the exam, in the first midterm. So the exam is going to be comprised by 2 sections. The first section is going to be a definition based. So here is a collection of concepts that you are supposed to master. So if I say define economies of scale, you need to give me a definition, or define debt trap, you need to give me a definition, not a whole essay, just a definition. And then the second part is going to be a short answer question. So questions, sample questions are here that cover all the material that we have been covering these first, 7-8 weeks. So my recommendation to you guys is that, well, if you want to see this as homework, that would be good. If you want to see this as a study strategy, that's great too, whatever. Make sure that you are able to define every single thing on the first section, and that you at least mentally have a good, correct answer for all of the questions under this first section. If you do that, I think you are going to be in a really good shape to answer the questions in the real exam. Notice the exam questions are not going to be taken from this sample. They're going to be different questions. I'm just giving you this as an example, okay? So don't think that if you only concentrate on this, you're done. No, this is just a sample so that you have an idea of what to expect. I have somebody in the chat. Let me see. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Yes. So questions, comments about this? Jacob. Go ahead, Jacob. For some reason, I see your hand up. I see your square green, but we can listen to you, Jacob. I'm sorry. Maybe it's your microphone or something. You may want to type your question if you have time. Anybody else? How long we will have for the exam? Okay, I am not sure yet, Jacob, but more likely it's going to be probably a couple of hours, maybe 2 hours. You know, in a regular face-to-face class, the exam is taken in the classroom, and you have 15 minutes. But you know, these are different times. So I'm thinking about giving you 2 hours. So that's probably gonna. I haven't made up my mind yet, but that's probably gonna be the case. Yeah. Okay, guys, it's 2:50. I think it's a good time to stop. And on Wednesday, we're going to start the brand new section speaking about the Washington Consensus that, well, is going to add to this conversation, hopefully enrich the discussion too. So until then, keep reading, guys. I'll see you on Wednesday. I'm going to stop recording now.